Hey, today I'm going to talk a little bit about something I started to touch on yesterday, and that is the difference between power and authority. Now, it's very important that people recognize the difference, because a lot of claims that people make that you ought to do this or you should do that are ultimately based on the old adage, or not the old adage, the old saying that might makes right. For example, someone tells you, you ought to do this, or you ought not to do that because God will put you in hell for it. Well, actually, that's not a good reason to not do it, because behind that is the notion that might makes right. That is not a good reason to refrain from doing it. The only good reason that you shouldn't do it is because it's wrong. Okay? The fact that you might go to hell for doing it is incidental. Okay? The reason you shouldn't do it is because it's wrong. And there we have the difference between power and authority, right? God may very well have the power to throw you in hell for doing something wrong. That does not give God the authority to tell you what to do, right? To define right and wrong. God's moral authority has to be found somewhere else. Now, there's a great illustration. I think it's a Buddhist story that kind of illustrates the difference between power and authority. Well, first I had to give my definitions. Now, these are definitions that are in a state of change just about every few weeks, because the more I reflect on these issues, the more I learn about them, the more I read about them, I gain better perspectives. I find things in my definition that aren't good enough, and need to revise it, and so forth. And that's how philosophy always works. So these are kind of provisional, but power is the ability to compel someone else to act, right? Or to compel an action or an event, right? That's power. Power is ability. Authority is that which one has an obligation to obey. Not that which one must obey, like physically, not that which one obeys out of fear or out of hope for a reward or out of anything along those lines, but obeys out of an obligation or out of duty, right? So authority is based on obligation. Power is based on force. And there's a great, I think it's a Buddhist story, I'm not sure, it might be Hindu, I think it's Buddhist, that illustrates the difference wonderfully. And it is that there was a great swordsman, a warrior, who met a monk on the road. And the swordsman, thought the monk was a fool. You old fraud. What is the special wisdom you're supposed to have, right? You don't know anything. And the monk says, well, I can show you the gates of heaven and the gates of hell. And the swordsman says, you can't do that. And the monk says, yes, I can. And so the swordsman says, well, go ahead. I don't think you can. And the monk says, well, you're a fool if you think I can't. This makes the swordsman angry. So the swordsman draws his sword and says, what did you say? And the monk says, I have now shown you the gates of hell. The swordsman is humbled at this and returns his sword to his sheath, and the monk says, I have now shown you the gates of heaven. That I think, is a great story because it illustrates the difference between power and authority. The swordsman represents power, right? And the swordsman believes that his arbitrary will can compel, different things, right? Or should be able to compel different things. Just because he's the strongest, just because he has the big sword, right? But what the monk has is what's called day, or spiritual authority. And that is the sort of thing we find in the Bible, in the New Testament, when it says that Christ is taught as one having authority from God and not as the scribes, so that people were astonished at his teaching. That is the idea of authority. Jesus did not have, at least visible, power, right? Caesar had power. Pontius Pilate had power. Jesus did not have power, but Jesus had authority. And so we have the difference. Authority is not based on force, it's based on obligation. Power is based on force. And so it's very important if we ever try to justify an ethical judgment, that we do not appeal to notions of heaven or hell, because that is a justification which is appealing to power and is not appealing to authority. All of our ethical judgments need to appeal to authority. There are those who say that appealing to authority is a fallacy. No, it is not. Appealing to an invalid authority is a fallacy. And appealing to an authority that is not justified is a fallacy. But in some of my other videos where I tried to deal with the Euthyphro dilemma, I tried to sort of show why I believe God's ethics are valid. I have got God now as a justified authority. Of course, it was kind of windy that day. I might have to redo some of it. But anyway, so what I'm trying to do is build an ethical framework that is based on this idea of obligation to authority, not based on power, which is based on right and wrong, not on heaven and hell. Heaven and hell might be things we imply, right? Things that come much later. But fundamentally, the reason we should act in certain ways and not act in other ways is not because we'll go to heaven or we'll go to hell. It's because such and such is right or is wrong. And and the difference is the difference between power and authority. Now, of course, there are all different kinds of power and all different kinds of authority, right? It's not like we have just one kind of power and one kind of authority, and they're completely separate. A lot of times we have both power and authority resident in the same person. Oh, and also, power doesn't necessarily mean the physical power of the one individual is standing right in front of you at the moment. Power is about ability to sort of make things happen, right? A sort of power of causation. So the President of the United States is a very powerful man. Not because he himself physically has muscles so he can beat you up. It's because he can call the world's most powerful military to beat you up, right? Because he has, his authority over the military gives him power over you, right? So they come into all kinds of different relationships. So it's not as simple as the swordsman and the monk. But what the swordsman and the monk gives us is an illustration of what the two sort of primitive ideas are. Well, I don't know if they're primitive ideas, but what the two basic ideas are. And, okay, what else is there? Oh, yeah, also authority comes in different varieties. There's moral authority, which is the kind I was mostly dwelling on today. There's sort of legal authorities, there are factual authorities, and in the church we have priesthood authority. And all these are different kinds of authorities, not the same kind. Anyway, that's what I was going to talk about today, the difference between power and authority. I hope everybody enjoyed it. I hope it was clear. If anyone has any questions about that, I always love questions. So yeah, post any questions you have, and I'll see if I can find an answer. All right.